Okay, it is May 1st. We're here with Sheriff William Honsal for his media availability.
Thank you, Sam.
All right, so we're just going to start right off into these questions. And so a reporter says, on Tuesday you said the governor has put in place state guidelines to where we cannot go out from under it. We can only become more restrictive as opposed to less restrictive. And then 2 days later, according to the reporter, you said, as sheriff, I'm the protector of constitutional rights in Humboldt County, and if an order is issued that I believe violates our constitutional rights, I'll not enforce it. So the reporter wants to know, needs some clarification
Sure.
regarding which is it, that you have to follow state orders or you can ignore them if you believe them to be unconstitutional. Can you clarify that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the rule of law essentially is that the state can come up with their guidelines, their rules, and they've done that through the penal code and various codes. They've come up with the rules, and in this case, a public health order from the state has made it so there's some strict rules in place. So the county can't become less strict from the state. We can only become more strict. That is the rule of law. Absolutely, that's been the case, and I don't object to that whatsoever. The only objection I have is that in these kind of circumstances where there's an executive order based upon a public health event, there is no due process. So the governor can't arbitrarily just make a rule without data and evidence that supports that. He has to have specific justification to do that. Because the executive order from the executive branch, regarding public health, it is rule of law and it is enforceable by the law. And so that's why he has to take the abundance of caution to make sure that it is narrowly focused to deal with the public health event that that he's making the rule for. And so by him making a rule based upon people not physically distancing themselves in a certain beach in Southern California, to make a rule that all 840 miles of coastline need to be shut down because of a very small area of California was violating his rules is arbitrary. It's oppressive, and it violates the Constitution. And so in that case, I didn't believe that he had justification for that based upon the understanding of the public health rules and his ability to make those executive orders. So in my mind, I'm not going to carry out an order that is unconstitutional, because if I enforce that action, essentially someone has the right to object and to sue over that. So I'm not going to do that. My job here is to really look out for our citizens to make sure that their constitutional rights are adhered to, making sure that the 14th Amendment is in place, making sure that they understand the Bill of Rights, that the Constitution is in place to make sure that government is put in check, not the people. This is government checks and balances. And so in these kind of rulings from the governor, he has to understand that the due process clause, in the Constitution really isn't there, for these public health orders. So he has to make them, just like our public health officer has to make them, through very specific purposes, to discuss a narrow set of facts, and based upon those facts to make a ruling to in the interest of public health. So that's the reason why I said it. That's the reason why I still support it today. And I believe that the governor realized that, and that's why he ended up changing his mind, and he ended up going the direction that he did, which I really applaud him for. I really appreciate the fact that he changed his mind and only just focused on those areas that he felt was an issue.
Okay, and so there was a follow-up question submitted with that one, and you kind of touched on the first part, why is closing Humboldt County beaches unconstitutional? But they ask in comparison to closing Humboldt County businesses, so why
Sure.
would it be unconstitutional to close a beach but not a business?
Right. So specifically, our public health order is a lot of times throughout the state is essentially less restrictive. But our public health officer is taking a set of facts. The facts were that COVID-19 was here in our county. We knew it, and it was spreading. And before the state actually put in a shelter in place, we did so. And by doing that, we had to identify what was essential travel, what were essential businesses, and what were the essential functions that people could do, essential activities essentially that people could do during this time while there was a shelter in place. So at that point in time, a decision had to be made of what those essential businesses were, because we have to keep people fed, we have to keep people, getting their medicine and all those things that are essential. We had to identify those and put rules into place to make sure that people stayed home so we could save lives, which did occur. Because California acted quickly, because our county acted quickly, we were able to flatten the curve and done a great job. The last 3 weeks, our curve has been flat, and it's been an outstanding job, and we're able to move on to the next phase now. And so that's the reason why the closing of certain businesses was mandatory at that time, and under the public health officer's order, she's able to do so because she has specific facts that can back that up, and I back her decision.
Great, and then that kind of brings us into this next question regarding phased reopening. So when the governor's order does allow for us to begin that phased reopening, you and the doctor have indicated a risk assessment will likely guide that discussion.
Sure.
So do you envision that businesses will be allowed to reopen by type on a case-by-case basis under a quota system with a certain number of businesses allowed to reopen at a time, or some other system? And what will this phased
Sure.
reopening look like, basically?
One thing we want to recognize is that businesses have become very, very innovative. Okay, and so what we don't want to do is be the person that comes out and says, okay, this business opens and that business stays closed, just arbitrarily. So we want to make sure to do a risk assessment. What are the businesses that we could open that serves a need in the community, that also can put in barriers in place to ensure that COVID doesn't spread? Because we know that once we start opening things up, COVID is still circulating in our community, and it could spread again, and we want to make sure that if people do test positive, we can do those contact tracing and go do all those things that we need to do. But in essence, what we want to do is allow businesses to put things into place, those barriers in place, and the hand sanitizing and queuing and masking policy for their employees. All these things, so people and businesses can make up their own mind and say, I can open under these circumstances. So that's our risk base. We're going to lay it out there, hopefully, and see what happens with after we do this community survey, and we find out from the opinions from our city leadership, from our Chamber of Commerce, from our general public, of what businesses they believe are the necessary businesses to open next. We'll take that information, we'll evaluate that, we'll take in the risk factors as well, and decide what is the balance that we could do to open up in this next phase. Now, we are lucky here in the county. We're a small county, and so we have a little more leeway too. And based upon the fact that we have our hospitals that are keyed up and ready to go, we have our mobile lab, we have our alternate care sites, and so we have all these things in place that really can help us if we do have a sudden outbreak. So that's why we're able to kind of look at things, evaluate them over a course of 2 to 3 weeks, see how they work, and then open up more businesses, and then get to that next phase, and then open up some of those non-essential, businesses that maybe are higher risk, and then after that, then the full opening.
And you mentioned the community survey that was pushed out this week. Can you just go into a little bit more detail, explain the role the community's input will play in making the decision to reopen?
One, we want to make sure that the community knows that we're going to hear them, and they have the right to be heard on this. And so we understand the impact this has made, and so we want to make sure we take their opinions into consideration. So that's we're going to have their results there, and we're going to evaluate those against the city leadership and like I said, the Chamber of Commerce's, to kind of look at all those together and then properly weigh those and see how we can make a decision based upon all that data.
Great. And so a reporter says that they've seen a noticeable increase in open businesses around Eureka. Specifically, they say hotels, vacation rentals, florist, construction crews. So people are wondering, is Humboldt County going back to business as usual already? So have any restrictions been lifted locally? If so, which have they been?
We are still in our phase 1, which means the shelter in place is still in place. There were essential businesses that were closed at the very beginning. Businesses that people thought were essential and were identified as essential and that were closed. Construction was temporarily shut down on a lot of facilities. And as people have gone and progressed over the last again, 6 weeks, we've seen our curve flatten, and people, I think, are more confident in going out and actually, opening up their essential business, and or starting their construction jobs. Travel is still allowed if it's essential travel. So if you're a part of essential service, and or visiting sick loved ones, those kind of things, and you can travel. So hotels can be open for those purposes, and vacation rentals could be open for those purposes. And so construction is going, is happening. It is a part of our economy. It is an essential part of Humboldt County. And so that is something that I know has been up and running, and that people will continue to do that throughout this.
So just clarifying, these were the businesses that were already allowed under the shelter-in-place order who may have closed out of an abundance of caution.
Yes, that's what I believe is happening.
Okay.
We haven't seen, we've had a steady, flow of people trying to call us, let us know that there's a business that's open that shouldn't be open, and we continue to investigate those. We haven't seen a sudden uptick in those calls, and so I just believe it's those essential businesses that are now operating again.
Great. And then can you speak a little bit about the governor loosening some of those outdoor recreational restrictions? How does that impact us here in Humboldt County?
So what's nice is that the governor is loosening up on some things, and so we're reciprocating that here on the coast. So the big one that we got a lot of complaints about is golf. So golf is now opened up. There we asked that there's certain restrictions in place as far as carts, only personally owned carts. And then, one person per cart, unless it's part of your household, then obviously you can have two. But we want to make sure that people are keeping the physical distancing requirements and the masking requirements when necessary. They've put in things in place in golf courses that make sure that those commonly touched surfaces aren't touched or taken away. So that's good. And there's a bunch of other outdoor activities that we've kind of already allowed, but the governor was very specific on things that he's allowing under his order for people to get out and to recreate, which is a very, very positive thing. And we put a press release out today kind of outlining those things. We're updated our website to make sure it reflects those activities are now approved, and people can do those here in Humboldt.
And there's been some fears regarding, this whole beach closure sort of a thing that happened this past week. People are a little bit nervous of tourists coming from the Bay Area
Sure.
and Southern California to Humboldt to get out of their shelter-in-place order and recreate here. Do you have any concerns about that?
Yes, I do. I have concerns about that. Our weather's getting nice, and so we still have a travel restriction in place. So if people come in from out of town and they are found in a public place here and they're not here lawfully, essentially, that they could be cited. And so we don't want that to happen. We want our locals to be able to enjoy our scenery and our environment. And we are closed for business as far as tourism goes, for tourism's sake. And so we want our locals to enjoy the natural beauty. That's why we're here. We love Humboldt County. We love the beach. We love the forest. And so we want to encourage people to get out and enjoy it and enjoy the sun. It's therapeutic. It takes the stress away. And I think it's a time that we can actually regroup and refocus and really focus on what's important in life. So.
Sure. And speaking of citations, has the sheriff's office or other law enforcement agencies had to issue them for the mandatory masking ordinance?
No. So I'm kind of unified with the law enforcement in this aspect, that we're looking for voluntary compliance. We have not issued citations for people that aren't masking. We're seeing a great majority of people that are abiding by this. We're seeing businesses that have put signage up that says do not enter without a mask. We won't serve you unless you have a mask. And so people are abiding by that. And so I really, really appreciate that, because again, we don't wear this mask for us or for fashion or for fear. We're there to protect others from potential harm. So do it. I know many people say it's a violation. I shouldn't have to do it, but I get it, okay? Do it because you care about our community. Do it because you care about others, and you want to see this thing pass. The sooner we can do all this together, the sooner we can allow this thing to pass, and for us to get back to what Humboldt County was all about.
And I know there's been a lot of protests, especially in other states, regarding shelter-in-place laws or orders, And there was another local protest here today at the county courthouse. Is local law enforcement preparing for the possibility of civil disobedience here locally?
we're always prepared for, whatever can happen. Civil disobedience can come out and break out at any particular time. And being Humboldt County, we're kind of used to it with protests at the different lumber sites or mill sites and for different events. So we're used to that. We're ready for that. I don't think it's going to get to that level here in Humboldt County. Again, we're less restrictive than a lot of other states. And so I think that people recognize that. They do have every right to protest, to assemble, and to do that. And I applaud them today. They were socially distanced. Many of them were masked. And so I'm really, really thankful for that. And getting their voice out and letting the people know that, that they want to see some action. And I understand that. And I understand that people want to get businesses back to normal. But I'm just asking for people to be patient. We are close. We are very, very close to opening up. And rest assured, we're doing everything possible to make that happen.
Yeah. So the pandemic has caused disruption in everybody's lives across the globe. And some people have been reportedly developing COVID-induced post-traumatic stress. With a New York City doctor committing suicide this week linked to PTSD. So a reporter wants to know, how are you doing? How are you coping as sheriff, as a husband, as a father? How are you doing
in light of this? Well, you're going to have to ask my wife that, how am I doing, and my kids. So I don't see a whole lot of them nowadays. And so, but anyway, life goes on, okay? And yes, it is very, very stressful, and you have to know how to manage that stress. Here in the county, we're focusing on our officers and our deputies' wellness and our employees' wellness. It is a big component of our day-to-day living, and so finding a way to handle the stress, because this job is stressful anyway. To add a pandemic on top of things, triples, quadruples the stress that we're all feeling. And so people have to come up with a strategy to deal with that. And the thing that you can't do is, if you do start to get depressed, is not tell someone about it. So talk to someone about it. Get out, seek help, because there is help out there. And this too shall pass. And so we will have a light at the end of the tunnel. We will get through this. We will get through this, and we'll be back as a county. But it's going to take some time. It's going to take some work, and it's going to be depressing at times. And so I urge people to really, number one, get out and participate with some kind of activity outside, and then focus on your wellness. And then again, if you need counseling, if you need to talk to someone, we have a mental health line here in the county. Please reach out to them. It's a 24-hour 800 number. You can talk to someone and get help that you need. And sometimes just talking about it helps and therapeutic. Believe me, we see that. We manage the 441-5000 number at the JIC, and sometimes people are just angry and they need to call and they vent, and they call, and our call takers are taking that every day. And they're talking people down and that kind of stuff. We understand it. That's not the primary reason why we're there as therapeutic, so people can have a voice to scream to. But anyway, it is one of those things that we want people to know that we're there for them, and there are avenues to explore in case people do get depressed.
And you talked about a little bit about deputies as far as their
Yes.
mental health on this. Well, what do you tell your deputies on the front lines when it comes to mental health related or COVID related mental health stress?
What we do is, we have an employee assistance program, and so people do have an avenue of reaching out. And I'm just really encouraging our sergeants too and our managers to kind of reach out to make sure that everyone is okay and check in, because everyone wants to put on a smiley face and give you the thumbs up and say, hey, I'm good. Sheriff, I'm good. Don't worry about me, I'm good. But we know this does take a toll. So we want the people that are closest to them to keep an eye out. And if you do see a friend, if you do see a coworker that is maybe shying away, maybe not as connected as they once were, not as happy they once were, reach out, give them encouragement, steer them towards a program, steer them towards a helpline, and help them out. Because again, this is stressful, and we've hashtagged this Humboldt's together. I mean, not as a rally cry, but really as an avenue to become more of a community through this whole thing, and to become cohesive and look out for each other and look out for your neighbors and your coworkers and make sure that we all get through this. We don't want more casualties from this through depression or suicide or because of overdose, alcoholism, abuse, whatever it may be. Okay, we want to come through this better and stronger, and so we can only do that if we stick together and that we help each other out.
Great. Is there anything else you'd like to include today?
Oh, what else is there? I don't think so. I think that's it. I just urge people that we're winding down here. Hopefully, with our phase 1 and moving to phase 2, we have people just to take this next step slow. Understand that we want to just take these incremental steps. But I'm just rest assured that we are doing everything possible to make this happen, and to be prepared in case there is a surge. St. Joe's, Mad River, Gerald Felt, all of our hospitals are getting geared up for this, and so I'm really, really happy that we have this partnership and that we may be ready to go in case there is potential to need all these hospitalizations.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.